Since the peaceful resolution of the Cold War, total nuclear war has played a large role in pop culture in works like books, movies, and video games. But among the Fallouts and Call of Duties of the world, one name stands out among the rest. What if I told you that George Miller was actually throwing a cheeky message in his infamous title, Mad Max? Let's find out. In early August of 1945, the world witnessed for the first time the awe-inspiring power of the atom at the hands of the US. The nations were shocked as the now iconic mushroom cloud engulfed the sky in radioactive horror above Hiroshima. The second detonation a few days later over Nagasaki drove home the sheer power of this new technology. However, with great power comes other people who want to take that power from you. While the United States held a monopoly on the nuclear power, mostly, the USSR, with the help of captured German scientists, developed their own independent nuclear program and detonated their first nuclear weapon in 1949, only 4 years after the first American nuclear detonations. It was at this moment that the US lost her control over the power of the atom. With the development of the Soviet nuclear program, the Americans realized that, to stay safe and stay powerful, they had to upgrade and advance their nuclear power and capabilities. At the same time, the Russians wanted to be the dominant force and pushed as hard as the Americans in this little battle and advanced their own nuclear capabilities. With the help of captured scientists on both sides, the USSR and the US developed the rocket-powered nuclear bombs that could travel from one country to another in the span of minutes. Along with nuclear sites on land, they also created nuclear launch sites at sea through nuclear submarines. The Americans even developed a single rocket that could split into multiple nuclear warheads, targeting multiple cities at once. As the weapons advanced, however, so did the attack time. The US government had to change their warning systems from the 6-hour evacuation window of a bomber plane to the 15-minute speed attack of an intercontinental ballistic missile. At its peak, it reached the point where children were taught the infamous line of "duck and cover," as warnings could possibly be so delayed that the first sign of a nuclear attack would be the flash of the explosion. At this point, the two nations realized that they had to change their strategies. Independently, both nations developed the Triad system, which was nuclear delivery from 3 different mediums: traditional bomber strikes, land-based missile sites through ICBMs, and submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs. Essentially, this ensured that one nation would be able to retaliate against the other in the event of an attack, even if it were devastating. Some say that this was absolutely mad, and those people would be absolutely right. The system earned the name Mutual Assured Destruction, or MAD for short. It essentially held the idea that if one nation were to destroy the other would be able to strike back fast and hard in a way that neither would emerge alive. Mutually assured destruction was put to the test during the very peak of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Essentially, what happened was that the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, in an attempt to gain a foothold against the superior globally ranged American missiles, made an arrangement with the Cuban communist leader Fidel Castro to have Soviet missile sites in Cuba, which was much closer to the US. Unfortunately for Khrushchev, the US, through U-2 spy planes, managed to spot the construction of the sites. The debate in the White House was furious between the Hawks, who demanded immediate strikes against the USSR, even ground attacks if necessary, and the Doves, who claimed that diplomacy was the only way out of the situation without nuclear war. The world held its collective breath as a decision was made. In the end, the middle ground group called the Owls won out with their strategy of a blockade of Russian ships from entering the Cuban waters. In a staring contest between Khrushchev and the US President John F. Kennedy, Khrushchev ultimately blinked and removed the missile sites, while Kennedy lifted the blockade. In a rather poetic turn of events, the very destructive power of the nuclear bomb is what saved the world from its horror. Each nation realized that any attack would result in a swift end to its own existence. Furthermore, with better understanding of the capabilities of the atom, the nations also came to understand that total nuclear war between just the two of them would actually destroy much of the world in the form of nuclear winter and fallout. This grave responsibility hung on their shoulders whenever nuclear war was on the table. Thankfully, after the crisis, the USA and the USSR moved towards nuclear disarmament and the end to the spread of nuclear weapons. The process is slow, but a world without nuclear weapons is finally seeming like a reality. In addition, as a show of good faith and a movement towards peace between the two nations, a hotline was installed between Washington and Moscow, which can be seen in hilarious use in Stanley Kubrick's famously long-winded title, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb.
Can you imagine how I feel about it, Dmitri? Why do you think I'm calling you? Just to say hello? Of course I like to speak to you. Of course I like to say hello. Not now, but any time, Dmitri. I'm just calling up to tell you something terrible has happened. It's a friendly call. Of course it's a friendly call. Listen, if it wasn't friendly, you probably wouldn't have even got it.
Total nuclear war. For many, this conjures up the image of children under their desks and mushroom clouds out of the windows. It's a devastating prospect, which has ironically played out in our entertainment in books, movies, and even video games. However, among all the titles, George Miller's Mad Max subtly screams out the truth behind the war. Mutually assured destruction. This mad idea caused great strides in nuclear technology, while keeping the world safe from global fire.